The moment Kieran Blackwell stepped into the Grand Meridian Hotel's opulent ballroom, every eye turned his way. Not because he was worth billions, though Forbes had recently bumped him to number 8 on their list, but because 15 years ago he'd been voted least likely to return for a reunion at Westlake Preparatory Academy. He adjusted his custom Tom Ford suit and scanned the room filled with former classmates, many of whom were now pretending they hadn't spent their teenage years ignoring or mocking him. His assistant had begged him not to attend, citing 3 urgent meetings in Tokyo and a pending acquisition in Berlin. But something, perhaps masochism, perhaps curiosity, had compelled him to RSVP. Kieran Blackwell, holy crap, you actually showed up. Brad Thompson, former quarterback and eternal loudmouth, clapped him on the shoulder with unnecessary force. Heard you're some tech mogul now, Black Core Systems, right, killing it in the market. Kieran forced a smile. Nice to see you too, Brad. Hey everyone, Blackwell's here. Brad announced, drawing even more attention. Remember that nerdy kid who built a functioning robot for the science fair? Look at him now. As the crowd began gravitating toward him, Kieran immediately regretted his decision. He'd spent high school as the awkward science geek with thick glasses and acne, building computers while others built social connections. Now they all wanted to be his best friend. He was considering a quick exit when he spotted her across the room. Julia Morgan. His chemistry lab partner senior year, the only person who'd ever treated him with genuine kindness. She was standing by the punch bowl, her chestnut hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders, looking almost exactly as she had 15 years ago. Their eyes met, and she smiled that same warm, unguarded smile that had been his only bright spot during those difficult years. Before Kieran could approach her, the reunion committee chair clinked her glass for attention, announcing dinner would be served in 30 minutes and encouraging everyone to find their assigned tables. Kieran glanced at his place card table 12. He wondered if the seating arrangements had been manipulated once his RSVP came through. Mr. Blackwell, might I get a quick photo for our newsletter? The committee chair appeared at his elbow, smartphone already raised. I'd rather not, thank you, he replied, his tone making it clear it wasn't a request. As the woman retreated, Kieran felt a light touch on his arm. Still not a fan of having your picture taken, I see, Julia said, her voice just as he remembered melodic with a hint of playfulness. Julia, he said, surprised by how happy he was to see her. You look exactly the same, she laughed. I'll take that as a compliment, considering we're both approaching our mid-30s. It absolutely was. He took in her simple but elegant navy dress. No flashy jewelry or obvious designer labels, unlike most women in the room. So the reluctant billionaire returns to his humble beginnings, she teased, but there was no edge to her words. I have to admit I never expected to see you here. That makes 2 of us, he replied. What about you? What have you been up to for 15 years? Before she could answer, they were interrupted by more former classmates eager to reminisce with Kieran about times they'd never actually shared. Julia gave him an understanding smile and mouthed later before slipping away toward table 12. It took Kieran nearly 20 minutes to navigate through the crowd, politely deflecting investment proposals and job requests. When he finally reached his assigned table, he found Julia already seated, along with several other classmates he vaguely remembered. Saved you a seat, she said, patting the chair next to hers. Figured you might need an ally. My hero, he said, genuinely grateful as he sat down. So, you were about to tell me what you've been doing since graduation. Nothing as headline-worthy as founding a tech empire, she replied, but I love my life. I'm a research scientist at Stanford's Medical Center, Immunology. That's incredible, Kieran said, genuinely impressed. Julia had always been brilliant, far smarter than he was, though she'd never flaunted it. It's fulfilling work, she nodded. And occasionally, I get to tell people I'm helping cure cancer, which isn't entirely false. Their conversation flowed easily through dinner, catching up on 15 years without any of the awkwardness Kieran had anticipated. Julia told him about her research, her small but comfortable house in Palo Alto, and her rescue dog, Einstein. Kieran shared stories of Black Core's early days, working out of his garage before the company exploded. "I remember when you first described your algorithm concept in chemistry," Julia said, twirling her wine glass. "I didn't understand half of what you were saying, but I knew it was brilliant." "You understood more than you let on," Kieran replied. "You were the only one who ever did. Remember when our catalyst experiment exploded and you covered for me with Mr. Hendricks?" Julia laughed. "I told him I added too much sodium because I didn't want you to get another demerit." "You saved my scholarship. If I'd been kicked out of AP chemistry, I would have lost my chance at MIT. "I knew how much it meant to you," she said simply. "Besides, you helped me through calculus. I wouldn't have gotten into Stanford without those late-night study sessions." The dinner plates were cleared and the DJ began playing music from their high school years. Couples moved to the dance floor while waiters circulated with champagne. "Would you like to dance?" Kieran asked, surprising himself. Julia raised an eyebrow. The Kieran Blackwell I knew avoided school dances like they were contagious diseases. "The Kieran Blackwell you knew couldn't afford dance lessons," he replied with a small smile. "This version can waltz without stepping on your toes, usually." She took his offered hand. "I'd be delighted to test that claim." On the dance floor, Kieran was acutely aware of Julia's hand in his, her other hand resting lightly on his shoulder. She was the perfect height for him, her eyes level with his chin. "So," she said as they moved to the music, "any significant others I should know about? Girlfriend, wife, Silicon Valley power couple?" Kieran shook his head. "No time. Black Core consumes most of my life. The price of success, something like that." He hesitated before asking, "What about you?" "Currently unattached," she replied. "I was engaged briefly a few years ago, but it didn't work out. He wanted me to give up my research and move to New York for his career." "His loss," Kieran said. "Your research is changing lives." The song ended and they returned to their table. As the evening progressed, Kieran found himself increasingly drawn to Julia. She hadn't changed fundamentally from the kind, intelligent girl he'd known. She'd simply become more of herself, more confident, more accomplished. "Remember the day we accidentally created that purple smoke that evacuated the entire science wing?" Julia asked, as they shared a slice of chocolate cake. Kieran laughed. "You mean when you deliberately added that compound because you wanted to get out of taking the history quiz next period?" Her jaw dropped. "You knew, all this time you knew that wasn't an accident, Julia. You were the most meticulous lab partner in school. Nothing you did was ever accidental." She covered her face. "I was terrified we'd get suspended." "I never told anyone," he assured her. "Besides, it was impressive chemistry." As the evening wound down, Kieran realized he wasn't ready to say goodbye. When the committee chair announced the after-party at a nearby bar, he turned to Julia. "Interested in continuing this conversation somewhere quieter?" he asked. "I'd like that," she replied. "There's a little cafe around the corner that should still be open." Outside, the autumn air was crisp. Julia shivered slightly, and Kieran removed his suit jacket, draping it around her shoulders. "Such a gentleman," she said with a smile, pulling it closer. "This probably costs more than my first car." "It's just a jacket," he replied. "But thank you for not treating me differently. Everyone else tonight seemed to see only my bank account." Julia looked up at him. "I see the same brilliant, kind person I knew in high school. Just with better glasses and a much better haircut." The cafe was quiet, with only a few customers lingering over late-night coffees. They found a secluded corner table, ordered hot chocolate, and continued where they'd left off, discussing everything from favorite books to travel destinations. "I've always wanted to see the Northern Lights," Julia admitted. "It's been on my bucket list since I was 12. "I saw them last year in Iceland," Kieran said. "Words don't do them justice." "Add that to the list of reasons to be jealous of your life," she teased. "Don't be," he said, more seriously than he intended. The view would have been better with someone to share it with. The vulnerability in his voice surprised them both. Julia reached across the table and squeezed his hand gently. 15 years ago, if someone had told me Kieran Blackwell would grow up to be a lonely billionaire, I wouldn't have believed the lonely part," she said softly. Success came at a cost, he admitted. I built a company, but not much of a life outside it. It's never too late to change that, Julia said. You've accomplished what you set out to do professionally. Maybe now it's time for the personal goals. Their hot chocolates arrived, topped with whipped cream. Julia dipped her finger in the cream and dabbed it on Kieran's nose, breaking the moment's intensity. Very mature, Dr. Morgan, he laughed, wiping it away. Just making sure you remember how to laugh, she replied. You always had a great laugh, but you rarely used it. I didn't have many reasons to back then. Julia's expression grew thoughtful. You know, despite what everyone thought, you weren't actually an outcast because of your intelligence or your glasses. It was because you built walls. Even I only got glimpses of the real you. Kieran considered her words. Defense mechanism, I guess. My family situation wasn't great. Dad left when I was 8. Mom worked 3 jobs. I learned early that counting on people wasn't safe. And now, Julia asked, with all your success, do you feel safe enough to let people in? I'm having this conversation, aren't I? He replied, attempting lightness. You are, she acknowledged with a gentle smile. And I'm glad. They stayed until the cafe closed at midnight, exchanging phone numbers and promises to keep in touch. Outside, Kieran called his driver to take Julia back to her hotel. This was unexpected, she said as the sleek black car pulled up. But I'm really glad you came tonight. So am I, Kieran replied honestly. When are you heading back to California? Sunday afternoon. I'm spending tomorrow with my parents. They still live in the same house. Kieran hesitated, then asked, would you like to have dinner tomorrow night? There's a new restaurant in the downtown area I've heard good things about. Julia's smile brightened her entire face. I'd love that. After watching her car drive away, Kieran returned to his own hotel, feeling lighter than he had in years. For the first time since the invitation arrived, he was glad he'd attended the reunion. The next evening, Kieran arrived at Julia's parents' home to pick her up, purposely leaving his luxury car at the hotel and taking a regular car service instead. When she opened the door, he was momentarily speechless. She wore a simple red dress that complemented her figure perfectly, her hair swept up to reveal the elegant curve of her neck. You look beautiful, he said simply. Thank you, she replied, a light blush coloring her cheeks. Mom insisted I wear this. Apparently, she's been saving it for a special occasion for years. Smart woman, Kieran said with a smile. Ready to go, the restaurant was intimate and sophisticated without being pretentious. Over exquisite food and wine, their conversation deepened. Kieran found himself sharing things he rarely discussed: his mother's early death, just as Black Core was taking off, his fears about success changing him, his difficulty trusting people's motives. Everyone wants something, he explained. Investment opportunities, jobs for relatives, charitable donations. It makes genuine connections nearly impossible. That sounds incredibly isolating, Julia said thoughtfully. Have you considered that might be why you work so much? It's easier than navigating relationships with all those complications. Her insight struck home. That's probably more accurate than I'd like to admit. For what it's worth, she added, I thought you were fascinating long before you had billions. You once explained quantum computing to me using only a napkin and a salt shaker, and it was the most entertaining physics lesson I've ever had. Kieran smiled at the memory. You were the only person who ever asked questions because you actually wanted to know the answers. After dinner, neither was ready for the evening to end. They decided to walk through the city park, now beautifully lit for the upcoming holiday season. The night air was cold but clear, stars visible despite the city lights. So what happens next for Julia Morgan? Kieran asked as they strolled along the illuminated path. More groundbreaking research, Nobel Prize, she laughed. One step at a time. My team is close to a breakthrough on an autoimmune treatment. If it works as well in human trials as it has in the lab, it could change millions of lives. That's incredible, Kieran said. Much more meaningful than making smartphone apps more efficient. Don't sell yourself short, Julia countered. Black Core's security systems protect sensitive medical data, including our research. And I read about your education initiative providing technology to underfunded schools. That's changing lives too. They reached a small bridge overlooking a frozen pond. Julia stopped, resting her hands on the railing and looking up at the stars. Kieran stood beside her, suddenly very aware of how close they were. "You remember the astronomy project senior year?" she asked. "When we stayed out all night to track that meteor shower?" "Of course," Kieran replied. "You fell asleep around 3 a.m. I didn't have the heart to wake you, so I completed both our observation logs." Julia turned to him, surprised. "You did? I always thought I must have finished mine without remembering." "You looked so peaceful," he said quietly, "and you'd helped me so many times." It seemed like the least I could do. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Kieran was transported back to that night under the stars, when he'd first realized his feelings for Julia went beyond friendship feelings he'd never had the courage to express. "Kieran," she said softly, "why did we lose touch after graduation?" He sighed. "I convinced myself you were being kind out of pity the scholarship kid with the second-hand clothes and the too big ambitions. I didn't think someone like you would want to keep someone like me in your life." "That wasn't true," she said firmly. "I tried to email you a few times that first year, you never responded. I was drowning in student loans and working 3 jobs while taking a full course load," he admitted. "I told myself I didn't have time for distractions, but really I was afraid. Afraid I'd never amount to anything, that I'd disappoint you." "And now?" Julia asked, her gaze unwavering. "Now I'm afraid of something else entirely," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid you'll think I'm only interested, because we've reconnected when I'm successful, that you won't believe I've thought about you over the years, wondered what might have been if I'd been brave enough to tell you how I felt back then." Julia took a step closer. "How did you feel?" Kieran took a deep breath. "Like you were the only person who ever really saw me, and like I wanted to be better because of it." She reached up, gently removing his glasses. "I still see you, Kieran. Success hasn't changed who you are at your core." When she stood on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his, Kieran felt something long dormant within him awakening. Her kiss was gentle yet confident, and he responded with 15 years of unspoken feelings. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the cold night and their past seemed to fall away. When they finally separated, Julia's eyes were shining. "I've wondered about that for a very long time," she whispered. "Me too," Kieran admitted, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Was it worth the wait?" Her answer was to pull him down for another kiss, this one deeper and more certain. When they parted again, they were both breathless. "I don't want to say goodbye again tomorrow," Kieran said. "Not when we've just found each other." "Then don't," Julia replied simply. "Come to California, visit me, see my lab, meet Einstein. I have a guest room." "I have meetings in Tokyo next week," he said, "but after that, I could come for a few days if you're sure." "I've never been more sure of anything," she said with that familiar, open smile that had always made his heart beat faster. They walked back to her parents' home hand in hand, making plans for his visit. At her door, they shared one more lingering kiss before reluctantly saying goodnight. The next morning, Kieran sent a massive arrangement of wildflowers to her parents' house, remembering her mention years ago that she preferred them to roses. The card read simply, "Until California." Julia called him immediately. "They're beautiful, but how did you remember I love wildflowers?" "I mentioned that once during biology field work." "I remembered everything about you," he admitted. "I just never did anything about it, until now." 2 weeks later, Kieran's private jet landed at San Francisco International Airport. Julia was waiting, casually dressed in jeans and a Stanford sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. The moment he saw her, Kieran knew with absolute certainty that no business deal, no acquisition, no product launch had ever made him feel as excited and nervous as this reunion. "Welcome to California," she said, wrapping her arms around him. "How was Tokyo?" "Productive," he replied, inhaling the light citrus scent of her shampoo, "but too long away from you." They'd spoken daily since the reunion video calls that often lasted into the early morning hours as they rebuilt their connection, and discovered how well they still complemented each other. Julia's practical intelligence balanced Kieran's visionary thinking. His resources could help accelerate her research. Her groundedness kept him connected to what really mattered. Over the next 3 days, Kieran experienced Julia's world. She showed him her lab, where her team was doing groundbreaking work. He met Einstein, her enthusiastic golden retriever mix, who immediately decided Kieran was his new best friend. They explored her favorite hiking trails, ate at local restaurants where she was greeted by name, and spent hours talking on her small back porch. On his last evening, as they sat sharing a bottle of wine in her living room, Kieran realized he hadn't checked his email in hours, something that had never happened before. "What are you thinking about?" Julia asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. "How easy it would be to get used to this," he admitted. "Being here with you, not checking my phone every 5 minutes, just being present." Julia set down her wine glass. "What's stopping you? Geography, for one thing. You're here, I'm in New York. We both have established careers." "True," she nodded. "But we also have options most people don't. You could work from anywhere. Black Core has offices in Silicon Valley." "You've thought about this," Kieran observed. "Of course I have," Julia replied. "Haven't you?" "Since the moment I kissed you on that bridge," he acknowledged. "But I don't want to rush you or pressure you. This is still new." "In some ways," she agreed. "But in others, it's 15 years in the making. We already know the important things about each other. The foundation is solid." Kieran took her hand. "What are you saying exactly?" "I'm saying I'm not afraid of moving quickly when it feels right," she said. "And this feels right, Kieran. Meeting again after all these years, reconnecting, it feels like we're exactly where we're supposed to be." He pulled her closer. "I feel the same way, so where do we go from here?" "Forward," Julia said simply. "Together." 6 months later, Kieran had relocated Black Core's headquarters to Silicon Valley. He'd purchased a beautiful home overlooking the Pacific, close enough to Julia's lab for a reasonable commute, but far enough from the city for privacy. Einstein had thoroughly approved of the expansive yard, and his new dog siblings, a pair of rescue greyhounds Kieran had adopted. Julia's research was progressing rapidly, partially thanks to a substantial anonymous donation that had allowed her to expand her team and equipment. Though she suspected the source, Kieran never confirmed it, wanting her success to remain entirely her own. On their 1-year anniversary of reconnecting at the reunion, Kieran took Julia back to their hometown. They visited their old high school, now renovated but still recognizable. In the newly built science wing, another anonymous donation, they found their old chemistry lab. "It looks so different," Julia marveled, running her hand along the sleek new countertops. "But it still smells the same," Kieran laughed. "A unique combination of chemicals and teenage anxiety." He led her to their old lab station at the back of the room. On the counter sat a small velvet box. "Kieran," Julia breathed, her eyes widening. "15 years ago, we were partners in this lab," he said, taking her hands in his. "You saw potential in me that no one else did, not even myself. You believed in me when I gave you no reason to. And when we found each other again, you helped me realize that all my success meant nothing if I had no one to share it with." He opened the box to reveal a stunning emerald ring surrounded by diamonds. "Julia Morgan, would you do me the extraordinary honor of being my partner for life?" Tears filled Julia's eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Kieran felt a sense of completion he'd never experienced before. All the success, all the wealth, none of it compared to finding his way back to the woman who had always seen him clearly. "I think Mr. Hendricks would be proud," Julia said, admiring how the emerald caught the light. "His 2 best students finally getting the chemistry right." "Actually," Kieran replied with a grin, "I spoke with him last week. He's retiring this year and I asked for his blessing. He said he always knew we were a perfect match, scientifically speaking, of course." "Of course," Julia laughed, pulling him close for a kiss. "Some reactions just take time to catalyze properly." Their wedding the following spring was intimate but joyful, held in the botanical gardens where they'd once conducted a field study. Einstein served as ring bearer, performing his duty with unexpected dignity. Among the guests were several former classmates from Westlake Prep. all marveling at how the school's unlikely pair had found their way back to each other. As they shared their first dance as husband and wife, Kieran held Julia close, still sometimes unable to believe his good fortune. "What are you thinking, Mr. Blackwell?" she asked, her eyes shining with happiness. "That I'm the luckiest man alive, Mrs. Blackwell," he replied, "and that I should have gone to our 10-year reunion," Julia laughed. "Everything happens when it's supposed to. We needed those years to become who we are now, ready for each other." "Always the scientist," Kieran said fondly, "finding the pattern in everything." "Speaking of science," Julia said with a mysterious smile, "I've been conducting a rather important experiment recently." Kieran raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what kind of experiment?" She placed his hand gently against her stomach. "The kind that takes about 9 months to complete." For a moment, Kieran couldn't speak. We're going to be parents," Julia confirmed, her eyes sparkling with joy and tears, "in about 7 months. I confirmed it yesterday." Overcome with emotion, Kieran pulled her close, oblivious to the guests around them. "I love you," he whispered against her hair, "more than I ever thought possible." "I love you too," she replied, "my reluctant billionaire with a heart of gold." As they continued their dance, surrounded by friends and family, Kieran reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From awkward lab partners to successful professionals, to finding each other again when they least expected it. All those years he'd spent building walls and chasing success, never realizing that true happiness had been waiting for him all along in the form of the brilliant, kind-hearted woman who had always seen the best in him. They'd come full circle, from partners in chemistry to partners in life. And as they moved across the dance floor, Kieran knew with absolute certainty that no business deal, no technological breakthrough, no amount of wealth could ever compare to the simple, profound joy of loving and being loved by Julia Morgan now and forever, Julia Blackwell.